Donald Trump even has his Department of Justice meddling in the economy again. I got two major data points this Tuesday morning on Legal AF on Trumpenomics, one having to do with the Department of Justice firing its top antitrust officials so that lobbyists associated with MAGA can lobby the Department of Justice to approve mergers and acquisitions that hurt the American consumer. And the perfect example of that is Hewlett-Packard's merger with Juniper, and the fact that the whistleblower, a senior executive, a senior leader in the Department of Justice who was thrown out, has not only become a whistleblower, but has filed a notice, a letter with a federal judge asking the federal judge to look into the propriety of the approval of the deal. A $14 billion deal that MAGA lobbyists love and want, but it doesn't mean it helps you and me. And then secondly, there's the little reported, I'm going to cover it here, Donald Trump trying to make Goldman Sachs fire its chief economist, Jan Hatzius, because he doesn't like the fact that he has accurately reported that up to 70% of the tariffs that Donald Trump has placed on goods and even services coming into this country are going to ultimately, in the next 6 months, be eaten by the American consumer. That the burden sharing that was going on at the very beginning with businesses eating most of the tariffs is about over. And now most of that increase in prices is going to be passed right on to the consumer, meaning inflation, meaning the consumer price index, meaning the cost of goods and services for Americans. Donald Trump doesn't like that. And so he's not only fired his commissioner of the Bureau of Labor Statistics to put a MAGA sycophant in its place, but now he's attacking Goldman Sachs. And Goldman Sachs is not completely unconflicted here because Goldman Sachs is in the running along with 6 other banks to be part of the underwriting team for a giant initial public offering in which Freddie Mae and Fannie Mac, which service the mortgage market, they're government-backed enterprises that service the mortgage market. They effectively make sure that mortgages get made. They take mortgages and stick them all together in a product we call a mortgage-backed security, an MBS, and therefore continue to grease the skids of the mortgage market. Well, they're going public because Donald Trump wants to privatize part of them. That entity is worth about $500 billion. And if it goes public at just 10%, you're talking about a $30 billion. It would rival the largest IPO in history. And Goldman Sachs has a vested interest in being part of that and earning tens, if not hundreds of millions in fees. And now its economist is under fire, not because he got it wrong, because he got it right. You got it right. You're on Tuesday morning on Legal AF. On video number 1 is always about Trumpenomics. I'm Michael Popok, and let's get to it. The 2 data points I put together here. Firstly, let's talk about the antitrust whistleblower, a guy named Roger Alford. He's now a law professor at the University of Notre Dame, but until recently, he was a senior Department of Justice lawyer and manager leader in the antitrust department. The antitrust department ultimately has to approve the mergers, along with the Securities and Exchange Commission, has to approve the mergers of competitors. And the Trump administration was against, for instance, the merger of Hewlett-Packard Enterprises, HPE stock symbol, with Juniper in the wireless technology area because it would concentrate too much business in one company, eliminating a competitor. And so they were all against it until they were for it. And how the Trump administration got for it was the basis of the whistleblower allegation by Mr. Alford, who was in the first Trump administration and also a senior antitrust level. And when he complained that MAGA lawyers and MAGA lobbyists had infested the process at the Department of Justice's antitrust division, basically rendering it feckless, rendering it useless, rendering it biased and compromised. Or as in his words, that Pam Bondi corrupted the antitrust approval process. And she did it with herself, and she did it with Stan Woodward, who's one of the MAGA lawyers that Donald Trump just made the number 3 or appointed him to be the number 3 in the Department of Justice. He used to represent Jan Sixers. He used to represent co-defendants in the Mar-a-Lago case. And now he's running around doing the bidding and doing the labor work for the Department of Justice. And according to Alford, the whistleblower, that whole system got corrupted. And suddenly, boom, after the MAGA lobbyists and the MAGA lawyers and the MAGA fees were paid, suddenly the Trump administration Department of Justice had no problem with the merger. What happened to the elimination of competition that would undermine consumers? What happened to that? That went out the window. And so that merger has to ultimately be approved by a federal judge. So Alford made a complaint to the federal judge along with being a whistleblower. And he said, don't allow this merger. Look into the process, the backdoor dealing, the lobbying that went on, and the smoke-filled room at the Department of Justice because of Donald Trump. In fact, he gave a speech recently, Alford, in which he said, if you knew what I knew, you would be up in arms and you'd be demanding the federal judge intervene and stop the merger as well. So this is an example now of the Department of Justice being used to corrupt our economy by way of Donald Trump. No surprise. No surprise. They're not a legitimate law enforcement organization that can be trusted. They're not independent. They're just a part of the political machine of Donald Trump. Now let's switch gears. You have that data point for this morning. Donald Trump's not content with cooking his own books or putting the chief chef in to cook the books at the Bureau of Labor Statistics and reject and undermine every independent metric that comes out that shows his economy and his economic policies are failing the American people. Oh no. He now has to go because there's so many other sources for data. There's so many other independent sources for data, including financial services and bulge bracket firms and banks. He has to go and attack them, especially the ones that rely on millions and hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue being generated by being in the good graces of the government, whether they're selling treasury notes or treasury bonds, or in this case, Goldman Sachs, one of the top 6 banks that any issuer would go to, potential issuer, to take a company public. That means selling a part of the capital in equity and taking in public shareholders that, first institutions, all the big banks buy the blocks and the pension funds and the hedge funds and the Fidelities of the world. And then finally, the little mom and pop investor with their app gets to buy a piece of this company. It's called an initial public offering. It means the company for the first time has gone to the market, the capital markets, to shareholders, to potential investors to bring in capital in return for a share of stock, which represents some part of the equity of the company. That's an IPO. An IPO, if you're looking at the chain, I'll put on my Wall Street hat for a minute. You've got the issuer. In this case, it would be Freddie Mae and Fannie Mac. These were entities that were formed in the 1930s in order to stop the default on mortgages and to promote the mortgage market so that people can own home loans. It's currently run by a Trump sycophant, bootlicker, a Nepo baby named Bill Pulte. Pulte Homes, anybody live in one of those in the Southeast or anywhere else? That's his family. He's a huge Trumper, by the way. And so they've always wanted to privatize, make public, I should say, take to the public markets and bring in lots of cash and sell off a piece of Freddie Mae and Fannie Mac. So that entity, because of the amount, it makes a lot of money. It takes mortgages made by other banks. It buys the mortgages. It doesn't lend the money to the consumer, to the buyer, the borrower, but it buys the note. It buys the mortgage. It then puts it in a securitized package, meaning there's different on the shelf. This is what we call it in the securitization world. They put on the shelf different types of mortgages. Some are low risk, some are high risk, some are medium risk, depending upon the creditworthiness and the underlying collateral underneath. They usually rate them A, B, and C. An A loan would be like a perfect credit score and an amazing piece of property that has a lot of equity in it. A C score would be what's called a subprime mortgage, subprime loan, where the rate is very high, but the credit worthiness for the person is lower, and maybe the asset doesn't have as much equity. Some of it may be shopping centers, some of it may be home loans. Usually it's home loans with Freddie Mae and Fannie Mac. So they put it all on a shelf. They piece it all together. There's all sorts of modeling that's done to come up with one mortgage-backed security that's backed by all of these individual notes, all these individual loans. And it balances the risk, right? It puts the good with the bad, with the medium, with the B piece, the C piece, the A piece, and all this stuff. And then they sell that to the secondary market, people buy that as an investment and money comes flowing into Freddie Mae and Fannie Mac. Based on how much they bring in, which is in the billions, that it's probably worth, reasonable estimate, it's worth $500 billion as an enterprise. If they sell 10% of it or 15% of it, you're looking at $50 billion. Let's just say 10%, $50 billion. It would be the largest initial public offering in history. And banks help bring that IPO to market. Yeah, you got lawyers, you got brokers, you got financial services, you got investment banks all involved. But the heart of it is the liquidity that's involved and actually having the capacity to take a position, because usually almost always, if you are an underwriter for the IPO, you have to commit to holding and selling or buying in that entity by a certain amount. And that is your reward for taking that position. You'll say, let's say it's a $50 billion block total. Goldman Sachs says, I'll commit to making sure that 20 billion of it gets sold. And they're large enough to do it. And they can back it with the collateral that they have and the capital that they have. Another bank says, I'll take 5 billion, I'll take 100 million, and then it all gets syndicated. And then it goes out. And these banks serve as backstops to make sure the money comes in and guarantees a certain return or a certain capital raise to the issuer for the IPO. That's sort of a breakdown of why banks want to do it. And what do they get in return for taking that risk and committing to that capital and that amount? They get a fee based on the amount that's sold and all of that. And those fees are tens of millions and hundreds of millions of dollars. The lawyers make tens of millions of dollars. The accountants, the auditors make it, but the issuers, banks, right? The financial services company make it. So Goldman Sachs is already compromised. When Donald Trump says get rid of Jan Hatzius because he's doing the right thing and he's saying the right thing to the American public, that you, American public, you're going to be eating the fees, the tariffs at 70%. Donald Trump hated that. Fire that guy. And Goldman Sachs, blah, blah, blah. Now I got to fire him because I got to make $100 million. This is a guy who in 2008 famously predicted the mortgage default market and that the recession would be coming because of the way the mortgage market ran. He gets a lot of credit for that. He's not wrong. Donald Trump just doesn't like his numbers. So here on this morning, Tuesday morning, Legal AF, we learned two things, hopefully. We talked about two things together. One, the Department of Justice not being just used in courts to violate the rule of law and tear down our democracy, but also interfere with the economy in a way that you may not have thought about. And we've learned more here on the briefing about initial public offerings and why companies like Goldman Sachs, whose information and data is so relied upon by counterparties and investors all around the world, including the United States, are themselves compromised because they don't want to run afoul of the Trump administration. This economist may get fired. He hasn't been yet, but he may get fired because they want in on Freddie Mae and Fannie Mac's IPO and the fees associated with it, and they're salivating over it. I'll continue to follow it all right here on Legal AF. While you're here, hit the free subscribe button. And then I got another request. Here's the pitch. Come over to Legal AF Substack. I'm doing 2 or 3 lives a day, along with amazing guests. I just was on with Adam Parkhomenko, amazing political consultant and analyst, who's affiliated with us in the Midas Touch Network. You're going to hear some fascinating things, edge of your seat things in a colorful way with Adam. Katie Fang is on with me, Dina Dahl. I've had Adam Klasfeld. And then sometimes just me jumping on with you to talk about an issue that came just at the moment that I want you to know about, along with writing, along with the filings. Come over to Legal AF Substack. Subscribe there for sure. We're now top 10 rising in law and in politics and news on Substack. But hit the paid subscriber button. Some people ask me, how can we support you, Popok? This is the way to do it. It's the cost of about a Starbucks coffee a month. And you're going to be getting some amazing new content that we're going to make available to paid members on Legal AF Substack. So there's a place to support us. So until my next report, I'm Michael Popok. I'm Michael Popok, and I got some big news for our audience. Most of you know me as the co-founder of Midas Touch's Legal AF and the Legal AF YouTube channel, or as a 35-year national trial lawyer. Now, building on what we started together on Legal AF, I've launched a new law firm, the Popok Firm, dedicated to obtaining justice through compassionate and zealous legal representation. At the Popok Firm, we are focused on obtaining justice for those who have been injured or damaged by a life-altering event, by securing the highest dollar recoveries. I've been tirelessly fighting for justice for the last 35 years, so my own law firm organically building on my legal AF work just feels right. And I've handpicked a team of top-tier trial fighters and settlement experts throughout all 50 states known as big auto injury attorneys who have the know-how to beat heartless insurance companies, corporations, government entities, and their attorneys. Big Auto's attorneys working with my firm are rock stars in their respective states and collectively responsible for billions of dollars in recoveries. So if you or a loved one have been on the wrong side of a catastrophic auto, motor vehicle, rideshare, or truck accident, suffered a personal injury, or been the victim of medical malpractice, employment harassment or discrimination, or suffered a violation of your civil and constitutional rights, then contact the Popok Firm today at 1-877-POPOK-AF or by visiting my website at www.thepopokfirm.com and fill out a free case evaluation form. And if we determine that you have a case and you sign with us, we don't get paid unless you do. The Popok Firm, fighting for your justice every step of the way.